Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. So today I am back to do the Jane Austen July book tag. I've been on BookTube for 3 years and it seems like I am constantly just missing Jane Austen July, which is terrible because I love Jane Austen and this is definitely a BookTube event that I always want to participate in. But particularly because every spring summer I tend to end up taking a little bit of a break, which is usually about a month long. For the past couple of years, the time that I tend to take my time off is July. That happened in 2021, I took all of July off. I think I did the same thing in 2022 and I was gutted because I love doing Jane Austen July and I've not been able to do it the full justice that I want to. That might be a goal for next year, but I want to give a little nod to Jane Austen July now. I took my break a little bit earlier than I usually do for this very purpose. Even though I'm not going to be able to do all of the Jane Austen videos that I would love to do, I'm going to tip my hat to Marissa, Katie and Claudia and do the dedicated book tag so you can get a little bit more of a sense of my relationship to Jane Austen. And I'll also link below my ranking video, which I think I did in 2021 after I had most recently blitzed through all 6 of her novels. I still really love that video and I think most of my opinions hold true. So question number 1 is, what is your favourite Jane Austen book? For me, nice and simple, Pride and Prejudice remains my favourite of Jane Austen's books. Even though I do have a real soft spot for Emma and it's a very, very close second, Pride and Prejudice just doesn't have a flaw in my mind, whereas there are different things in other Jane Austen books that I do have little quibbles about. I just think it's fantastic. The characters are amazing. They're either funny or lovable or really deeply annoying but done in such a perfect way. The social commentary is amazing. The romance is great. You know, this was the blueprint for all of the romances that I love reading now. And I just never get sick of this story. However, when we get on to question number 2, who is your favourite Jane Austen protagonist? And I want to answer both for my female protagonist and my male love interest. As much as I do love Elizabeth Bennet and I do love Mr. Darcy, my favourite protagonist and love interest are both from Emma. I adore Emma Woodhouse and I swoon at the feet of Mr. Knightley. I know that Jane Austen had said that Emma Woodhouse was a character that not many other people other than herself would like, but I think that's why I love her so much. She would probably really irritate me if we met in real life, but I just think she is such a fun character to read about, even when she's being her most despicable. I think that's also why I quite enjoy Lady Susan. You just deeply flawed protagonists I find most engaging to read about. And Elizabeth Bennet is definitely very flawed, and I feel like the more that I read about Elizabeth Bennet, the more I love her. But whereas I feel like Elizabeth Bennet is very easy to love, Emma can be tricky. But that's exactly why I love her. She's vain, she's a snob. She has all of these grand plans about the brilliant things that she either does or will do, and never seems to follow up on any of them. And that's especially why I love her dynamic with Mr. Knightley, because he pulls her up on all of these things. And that's why I love him. He calls her out. He criticises her when she needs to be criticised, but she kind of gives it right back to him. It's a very equal dynamic between the two of them. He's also just lovely and kind and really funny. So yeah, I really love Mr. Knightley. One of these days I definitely need to do a video where I go in depth, ranking my favourite Austen heroines and heroes. But once again, that might be a job for next year. Question number 3 is, name a book off of your shelves you think Jane Austen would wholeheartedly approve of and why. Conversely, question number 4 is, name a book off of your shelves you think Jane would have hated and why. And unfortunately, in my current setup, I actually don't have very many books with me, so my choices are kind of limited. But I found a book that would actually answer both of these questions, and it is Game of Queens, The Women Who Made 16th Century Europe by Sarah Gristwood. Now you might be thinking, this is a bit of a rogue choice, Charlotte. Why would Jane Austen have either loved or hated this book? And it's because the work of Jane Austen's that this made me think of was actually her History of England, which she wrote when she was a teenager. If you are a history fan and you've never read her History of England, I highly encourage you to do so. It's really good fun. She's poking fun at a lot of history writing conventions, and while she's writing her History of England, she goes on this quite brutal tirade against Elizabeth I, talking about how absolutely horrible she was, how vile she was, particularly in her treatment of Mary Queen of Scots. And that's why I think she would both love and hate this, because it mentions both of those women, as both of these are 16th century queens who were obviously incredibly influential in Europe. I think she would be nodding along to all of the Mary Queen of Scots chapters, but she would be seething over the Elizabeth I chapters. In the same vein, I'd also love to know her views on She-Wolves, which is about the women who ruled England before Elizabeth. I feel like just seeing her on the front cover alone would be enough to have her seething with rage. Question number 5 is, who is your favourite minor Jane Austen character? And for me, it definitely has to be the Gardeners. I have such a soft spot for them. And it's one of my favourite things in Jane Austen reimaginings, or I should say Pride and Prejudice reimaginings, is getting more of an expanded view on the Gardeners. It's one of the reasons that I love The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow so much, is because the Gardeners really get to come into their own and be the supportive parents that Mary Bennet didn't really have growing up. I just love them. I think they're so level-headed and yeah, just able to give kind of that parental advice that Mr. and Mrs. Bennet kind of lack in giving to their daughters. Question number 6 is, name a book off of your shelves you feel was somehow inspired by Jane Austen's body of work. Once again, with my current setup, I'm kind of limited as to options. I only have currently 16 books on my TBR, and those are the books that are most readily available to me, so I had to go for the one and only romance book that I've got on my TBR, which is the True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. People frequently bring up the fact that Jane Austen's books were really the blueprint to all of the romance books that came later. A lot of the dynamics in her books, particularly in Pride and Prejudice, the enemies to lovers, the grumpy sunshine. I think this one is also quite interesting because it's about a romance novelist who has never fallen in love herself. And that's interesting, kind of mapping onto Jane Austen's experience in her own life. Whether or not we do think she ever fell in love in her life, but we certainly know that she never married, even though that was very much the convention of the time. And so yeah, I'd be very interested to like talk to Jane Austen, because this main character feels like a fraud, like she can't really talk about love without having experienced it herself. I wonder if Jane Austen ever felt like that. And that's not me necessarily saying that you can't write novels if you've never fallen in love, definitely not. But it's interesting where our brains tend to go about our self-perception, and I think we all get a bit of imposter syndrome, and I wonder if Jane Austen ever had any. And finally, question number 7 is, which Jane Austen character do you love to hate? As I said in my previous point, I feel like the characters of Pride and Prejudice are so well done and written in such a lovable way, even if you do find them despicable. I enjoy reading about Mr. Wickham and Caroline Bingley and Mr. Collins. Oh, Mr. Collins, I love Mr. Collins so much. He probably would have to be the character I go for this, because the amount of times that other people have sent me like gift sets of the line in the 2005 movie, "What a superbly featured room and what excellent boiled potatoes." Many years since I've had such an exemplary vegetable.
What a superbly featured room and what excellent boiled potatoes. Many years since I've had such an exemplary vegetable.
Because it is my favourite line in that film. I feel like there are other characters in Jane Austen's that I hate more, like Aunt Norris I absolutely detest, and I feel very strongly about how much I hate her because I am an aunt myself, so I just cannot fathom, I can't intellectualise like hating your niece so much. If anybody spoke to my niece the way that she talks about hers, we'd be having words. But I don't love to hate her, I just full on hate her. And it's kind of the same thing with characters like Lucy Steele. I don't love to hate them, I don't find them lovable, whereas the Pride and Prejudice villains I do. When I'm reading it, it's kind of like when you're watching a panto and the pantomime villains come out and you enjoy how entertaining they are, so you clap along. Maybe you boo, but I also clap. And that's kind of how I feel about the Pride and Prejudice villains. They're just done so well and so entertaining in how horrible they can be that yeah, I love to hate them. So there we go, those are all of my answers to the Jane Austen July book tag. Do let me know if you've been participating in Jane Austen July. What have you been reading? Have you just been going for the 6 main novels? Have you been reading juvenilia or letters? Or have you been reading something that is just generally about Jane Austen's time? I would love to hear from you. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.